and I will begin. Okay, so Xin Chào, everyone. Welcome to this National Geographic Learning Vietnam webinar. Our title today is IELTS and VSTEP, Preparing Students for Success with Voices. So a little bit of housekeeping for you. So in our webinar today, you can participate and make general comments by using the chat box. And you can see that on your toolbar, you can change your settings to everyone, and this way we can all see your comments. If you have a specific question for our speaker, Gary, or about the Voices program, please type this into the Q&A box. And I will be monitoring both of these during the session. And if possible, I will answer your questions by text. And if there's something relevant for Gary, we will pass it on to him for the Q&A at the end. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to play you a very short welcome message from one of the Voices authors. This is Chia Swan Chong.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this special event for English teachers and educators in Vietnam. My name is Chia Swan Chong, and I'm a teacher trainer, communication skills trainer, and author of National Geographic Learning's new 7-level course for young adults and adult English learners, Voices. Voices focuses on helping students use English effectively as a tool for global communication. Aside from the usual grammar and vocabulary syllabus, Voices also helps students with their pronunciation, their communication skills, intercultural skills, and interpersonal skills, so that they can participate in conversations with people from all around the world and communicate successfully across cultures. I hope you enjoy exploring Voices and bringing the real world into your classrooms.
Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to hand you over to our special guest speaker today. So we are very lucky to have Gary Pathare with us today. He is one of the authors of our Voices program. He is also an expert on English language assessment. And he is also, of course, an English teacher with many, many years of classroom experience. So please welcome Gary. And Gary, I'm going to hand it over to you. So I'll stop sharing. Okay, over to you, Gary.
Hello, have I shared the screen?
You have, it's looking good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to give this presentation to Vietnam. Thank you very much. So who am I? Well, okay, I thought it might be nice to start with why would you listen to me? So as Will said, okay, I'm an English teacher. I've got a master's in TESOL. I've got a Trinity diploma, and I'm a teacher trainer. I've been a CELTA trainer, Trinity trainer for many, many years. I've done that full time. I'm a course book and materials writer. So recently I've written Voices, this level of Voices for the I don't know if you can see that, it's the new Voices beginner's book, and also Reflect for National Geographic, which is a reading and writing book. I've written many books and materials. I'm a presenter, as you can tell from this, I hope, and I'm an ELT consultant, an exam item writer. So I write exams for British Council and for Cambridge Assessment, and I also wrote the national exams for the UAE, which you can see in the bottom there. The picture at the bottom is I'm training some ministry people at the UAE Ministry of Education. And I'm an examiner marker. I've been one for many years, 9 years an IELTS marker. So I come at the idea of exam writing from the perspective of a writer of exams and also a marker of exams. But most importantly, as Will mentioned, I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching for 30 years since the top picture that you can see there. That was when I started out in 1991, I think, maybe there, so 30 years ago. And that's my kind of progression in teaching. So when I'm giving this session, I think of myself as a teacher primarily, but I've got an insight into exams from the other side, as it were, from the writer marking. I'm not a salesman or a manager or an academic particularly. I'm a teacher. So everything I talk about today, I hope, will be practical in the teaching classroom. So the aims of the session, briefly, are just to show you, to show ways of thinking about teaching IELTS VSTEP using a great new course book like Voices, and which I think will be really effective. And I want to share a lot of practical ideas about how you can help your students get the best possible grade for them in whichever exam they're taking. I'm not trying to tell you how to teach your class, because I think that all classes are different, and that we live in a diverse world of teaching. I don't have the best way. I'm sharing things that I know have worked for me and that will work for some of you if you choose to use them. Now, I'm going to look at 3 exams. The idea of this is to look at 3 different exams. So the IELTS Academic, the IELTS General Training, and the VSTEP exam. Now, that's obviously too much to cover in detail in an hour. So, but luckily, looking at the VSTEP and looking at these 2 exams, there's a lot in common with all of them. So what I say about one exam will be applicable to all the others. I think I found VSTEP to be very similar. It's obviously got some sort of modeling on IELTS. So within the time we have, I'll be using these as a basis for the session. Okay, so we're going to start with just thinking about this. So like my students, we've all been in the situation, your students are doing IELTS or VSTEP at the end of the year. So let's say it's September now. And the question we've got to ask ourselves is, what should I be doing? What should we be doing in the class? You might want to put a chat idea. What kind of things should we be doing? Should we be doing exam practice? If you want to put in any suggestions, that would be great. For example, should you be doing exam practice? Okay, I've got some ideas prepared. Speaking practice, getting an idea about current. Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I've got a few ideas here. So here are some ideas that I've had, and I'd like you to think about choosing the best 5 of these. So teaching English language and skills and showing how they're linked to the exam, maybe explaining the exam format and marking criteria, teaching exam tips and strategies, telling students why the exam is difficult and maybe a little bit unfair, sorry, I'm having trouble moving this forward, giving students practice using past papers or just bits of past papers, explaining how to prepare and what they should do on exam days, and or just ignoring the exam and focusing on teaching English, bearing in mind it's still September and we've got a whole year to go. So just think for a minute and think about the top 5, or which 5 do you think would be? I think 5 of these are good ideas and 2 of them maybe not such good ideas. Okay. So what I believe is this. I think that the telling students why the exam is difficult and unfair is probably not a good idea, partly because it's not true. These exams are excellent. They spent years developing them, making them extremely fair, and that's why they're so good. As the washback from them is great, as I hope we'll see in the session, that we can use them to improve the level of the students. And ignoring the exam and focusing on teaching English, that's great, but it's not what the students are going to be doing. And but they're not ignoring the exam, and we shouldn't be. We have to focus on that. So as a checklist, this is what I would suggest: that before the early stages would be teaching English language and skills. That's the main thing, because these exams are testing English language and skills, and that's what we have to. That's where we can make the most progress for our students. But we can connect those language and skills to the exam all the time. I think we should be helping students understand the exam format and marking criteria, and I'll be doing a lot of suggestions about that in this session. And also teaching exam tips and tricks and strategies to help them maximize their performance on the day. And then later, later in the year, perhaps as you get closer to the exam, I think you should be giving past papers for practice and giving students that kind of real whole exam practice, and also preparing them for the actual day of the exam, what to have for breakfast and where they have to go, and making sure they're completely clear about that. So there's lots we need to do in terms of preparation. Okay, so this is an exam. These exams, all three of them test the 4 skills. What do I mean by the 4 skills? So I've put here 2 productive and 2 receptive skills. You think about for a minute what would be in productive and what receptive. Which ones are the skills that we go this way, and which are the ones which come this way? And I'm sure that we're all on the same page here, that we talk about writing and speaking as productive and reading and listening as receptive. And I think this is probably the best way to be thinking about skills when we talk about exam preparation from a course book, because the way that we look at writing and speaking for exam preparation is very different than the way we look at reading and listening, receptive skills. I know that we can think of them as connected across. So writing and reading are obviously connected. I put them in squares for that reason. And speaking and listening are obviously connected because they're the modes. And those are true. But I'm going to think mostly in this session about productive skills and receptive skills. So why are they different? Okay, so I've got here, who marks them? So who marks writing and speaking? And who marks reading and listening? The teachers or admin, and which are easier and harder to improve the grade by knowing about the exam? So can you think for a minute to your answers to that? You can put them in the chat, but I won't be looking at the chat at this point, but if you want to put your suggestions in, that's fine. Please don't be offended if I don't answer questions in the chat box, because I have quite a lot to get through, and we'll come back to that at the end, and we'll be dealing with that. So this is key, I think. So writing and speaking are marked by teachers, and they're highly trained, and people who've been teaching writing and speaking markers have to keep retraining for IELTS, certainly, and I think probably for VSTEP on a regular basis, to make sure that they're doing the right job in relation to the criteria. Whereas reading and listening are now often farmed out to sort of admin people, lower paid, and they're just following rules, strict rules, for if things are correct or incorrect. And that makes a difference. So for me, it's easier to affect the grade positively if you know about the exams in the writing and the speaking, rather than in the reading and listening. It's harder to get away from the fact that you just need a higher level of reading and listening to do better. I find we can make more impact in writing, for example, than in reading by knowing about the exam. And that again will affect a lot of what I talk about today. Where does vocabulary and grammar come in all this? Well, they're not directly tested, and but they are graded. They're graded in the writing and the speaking, which is another difference with the productive and receptive skills. And they're really important for receptive skills. They're not directly tested in those, and they're not graded, but obviously reading and listening depend on the ability to understand vocabulary and grammar and the meanings associated with that. So we're going to start with writing. Now, I'm going to start with writing because writing, as I say, I think is the one that we can affect most. In fact, when I went to the UAE to teach in Dubai 20 years ago, and we used to do IELTS, and we were trying to get the students to 5s and 6s, depending on which program they're in. We found that a lot of the students had a much lower writing and reading score than they did speaking and listening, because maybe the profile of these students was that they were better speakers and listeners than readers and writers. And so often they'd get, say, 5s in speaking and 3s in writing. And I thought, okay, and also 3s in reading. So I tried to affect that with changes in the way I taught and the materials I used. And I found that I was able to change their writing significantly up to 4s and 5s. It's much harder to change the reading because to improve your reading, you really need to read a lot, and I didn't find it easy to get the students to do that. But I could make a lot of difference with the writing. So we're going to start with writing, and I'm going to look at teaching writing, what we can do, and also look at 3 exam strategies to help that the students can take on board in relation to writing. And most of the session will actually be on writing, but it will apply to the other 3 skills as well. So, teaching writing. I'm going to look at marking criteria and task types. These are things that we can think about in relation to improving our students' writing. Plans and model answers are important in my teaching. Plans for writing tasks and model answers for writing tasks. Ideas, where do we get those from? Where do the students get ideas from to write about? And grammar and vocabulary for writing. That's another thing I'll look at. Because remember, they're tested within writing. They're not, although they're not tested separately, they are tested in writing. So starting with marking criteria. Now you can see this lovely bit of marking criteria. This is a public descriptor for IELTS. You just go online and you find this. And so this is for task 2 writing. And you're allowed to look at it, you're allowed to use it. It's not a secret. And you can also find this for the other parts of IELTS and for VSTEP. I found I'm sure that if you're teaching it, you'll have access to those too. So I think it's important. What's great about descriptors and the fact they're there is they're known, they're predictable. This is how the writing markers are going to be marking the writing of your students. They have no choice. They're constrained by this. So the writing marker they can't bring a prejudice saying, I don't like students who do this, or I prefer this. They have to follow this. And that, to me, is empowering because I know what the writers are looking for because of these. And I know as a writing marker, that I've been constrained by these. And I've been tested on my ability to apply these accurately every year, and you're retrained and you have to be retrained if you don't get it right. So that's great because I know that's true. So you need to get to know these well, I think, as a teacher. But there's a lot there to get to know. So I would focus on bands around your students. So if your students are band 4 at the moment, you're trying to get them to a 5, that's where you need to focus your attention. You don't need to worry about band 9s, unfortunately, or 8s, or 1s, or 0s. So these are where I need to look. But this is, again, not very easy for a student. A student of band 4 wouldn't understand this language. It's not written for them. It's written for teachers and teachers' markers. So my next job will be to simplify it for students. And I've got here an example of what I do with my students. Now this will be shared later. So if I haven't got time to sort of go through each bit, but you'll be able to look at this if you want to later. This is what I would share with my students. So I've gone through the task achievement, the four criteria for writing, and I've simplified it into a way I think students can understand, even at a low level, and I've put a task associated with it so that they can compare, for example, IELTS Task 1 and IELTS Task 2. IELTS Task 1 needs an overview, IELTS Task 2 needs an opinion, and I've got questions guiding them towards understanding what the markers are looking for. And so it's important to clarify it for the students, to make it simple. And I think the students should be always in on the secret of these exams as much as we are. Keep it open. Don't try to hold back information from them that you feel only teachers should know. I think that's really a big mistake, in my opinion. Now going into the grammar in writing, which is one part of that initial criteria. When we're looking at writing, this is quite interesting. So this is something I've made that's simple for a student. And again, I've simplified what it looks like. And it shows you something quite interesting. I think it shows that we should be teaching sentence level grammar for IELTS and also for VSTEP. Because the criteria are based on sentences largely. So you've got, if you look at the punctuation, often wrong. There are long sentences with no punctuation. That's a problem at sentence level. You don't get that just from looking at grammar points in isolation. And if the middle one, complex sentences, that's very interesting to me because look, it says no. If it says no, there's no complex sentences. So these are 2-part sentences with 2 clauses which can't exist on their own with any meaning. So if you don't have those in there, you're going to be stuck at a 4 in that category. And if there are a selection of them, they get yes, that becomes band 6 in that category. But what's really interesting here is 5, it's trying. So they're not getting it right necessarily, but they're trying. And that's a really good feature of this exam when you think about it, because it's mirroring what good language learners do. If they make an effort, they try to go beyond their current level, and they're rewarded for that. And students, again, need to know that they're better, because you will have students who, we always have students who don't want to make mistakes, and they can see if they don't try and experiment in the exam, then they won't, they can't go up the grades. Second conditional is actually a type of complex sentence, and it's very nice because we teach that in the course books. And so, for example, I personally, what I like to do is to finish an opinion essay, or get students to finish opinion essays with a second conditional sentence, because you can always finish it. If you look at the conclusion I've got at the bottom there, this is an essay that they've written about driving an electric car compared to a petrol car. In conclusion, I personally feel driving an electric car is better. If everyone had an electric car, there would be less pollution. If past simple, would base form. That's the second conditional. It's the last thing that the teacher's going to read, and they're going to see, oh, that's a complex sentence. And it's predictable from the student's point of view, because you can always do it. So when I'm teaching, for example, a voices lesson, so you've got a great voices lesson here from Intermediate, Unit 5B. It's a grammar lesson, but it's not just a boring grammar lesson. It's a fully integrated lesson with what's going on and interesting activities. But I can connect that to the last line of a conclusion for their opinion essay. So that's what I would do. That's what I think is an important sort of strategy. If you're teaching from a great book, which is doing everything right in terms of language development, you can then link it directly to the exam and make that clear to the students. And you don't need to do anything extra for that. It's just a question of taking that grammar and showing them how they can use it to gain grades, which is going to please them if they think I can use that. That's what a student wants to know, I think. I use marking criteria constantly in the class. I want the students to come really familiar with it, so they're not just hidden away and used occasionally or brought out for exams. They're put into use all the time. So, for example, any writing marking I do, I would use these criteria: task achievement, organization, vocabulary, and grammar. Don't just keep it for IELTS or VSTEP type marking. So, for example, when I've got another lesson here from Voices, which is Preintermediate, and this is a great lesson. This is a really fun lesson. It's not just a sort of exam type lesson. The students do activities and they test each other and they have fun, and at the end they write a report about it. So it's more than an exam practice lesson. But at the end, you can add the 4 criteria to the checklist. In the book, you've got a checklist, uses appropriate headings, includes information, and so on. So what I would do here is to add those 4 categories to that checklist in some way, either putting on the board or giving the students a handout with them on, or when I mark their writing, adding those to my marking, so they get used to looking for those 4 things. Another thing you could actually do here is to ask the students to categorize the things in the checklist already. So, for example, uses appropriate headings. What would that come under? Chuck that in the box. Would it be task achievement, organization, vocabulary, or grammar? Okay, I imagine it would be organization. That's an organizational feature. Headings includes information about time, distance, quantity. That would be task achievement, because it's what you need to do to write a good report, and so on. So to keep the students going back to these criteria, so they become very familiar with them and they become second nature. Okay, so that was criteria. I'm going to move on to task types now. So again, there's something good about task types because they are predictable in the way that this is why writing is so easy to kind of affect, because just as we know what the criteria are, we also know what the task types are. If you're doing VSTEP, you're going to start off with a letter. It could be complaint or request or whatever. We know it's going to be 120 to 180 words. And we know they're going to stop to an essay after that, minimum 150 words. And in fact, those are very similar and close to the other type, the IELTS, if you look. Now, they're predictable, and we know that. If we know it, we can act on it. How do we know these? Well, I would look at test specifications and also go to past papers, obviously, to find examples. Just a note on that, with IELTS in particular, I would look at current and more recent books of past papers from Cambridge itself, preferably, because they do change over time. There's a sort of a gradual change in various directions, and using current ones will give the students the most chance, I think, of seeing the type of tasks that they're going to get in the exam they take. And then I focus on each task type individually. I look at the grammar, the vocabulary for each that's required, the language, and I look at the plan that would work for that task type, and make models for that to help the students. So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. I don't know if you recognize this task type. This is it's an IELTS academic task 1 task, which I've made. That's not actually from a paper, but it represents what I would call maps. This is quite a common task type now. It used to be, it came in a few years ago, and I think we didn't always prepare students for it, but it's actually quite a frequent one. And what you have to do here is to describe changes from one map to another map. This is from 1970 to now. And there could be 3 maps. Sometimes they have 3, and you have to go around 3 changes. And this is just an example of what I would do with this. So first of all, I would look at vocabulary. So with this task, a task like this, where you've got the fish counter moving and the washroom disappearing, I think, yeah. What kind of language what vocab would help with that? And I've just got 7 words there: extend, reduce in size, add, remove, move, improve, and modernize. There's 7 nice high-level, slightly higher level words, which would be recognized by the examiner as good. And that's specific to that task. I also added a spelling focus. If you look underneath 2, 3, 4, and 5, find 3 words with the same 3-letter spelling ending. I think the spelling can be built into all our work, especially for things like IELTS, where it's going to be important, especially in, for example, listening, where you have to spell the words correctly, and also it is marked in writing. So I've put a spelling focus on. My master's was in spelling, and I think a very effective way is just to add little spelling focuses within everything you do. And also make sure students keep a record of these words in the right place, so the map work is all together under IELTS task 1. And that, as a teacher, you can help them do it whatever way you feel is effective. Grammar. Now, I've noticed with this that this is a great example of where you can clarify grammar and sentence level grammar very easily, because the maps can only go from the past to the past, or the past to now, or the past, now, or future to the future. And if whatever they are, so this is the past 1970 to now, I only have to use the second one. Cafeteria has been extended. And if it's plural, the cafeterias have been extended. There's only 2 choices. And that's quite simple for a student. They don't have to know too much more than that for the purposes of this task. But what I would then do, let's go back, I would link voices grammar lessons to the task type. So whenever you're doing, for example, past simple for the was extended and past to be, that's the point where you can connect it to this task. Plans, I mentioned plans. So I look at this plan, and where do you get a plan from? Well, I use the marking criteria. I know that by going back to the marking criteria, they're looking for an overview. For a map, that could be an important basic change, something that's happened that's the main thing. Has it been modernized, or has it been, reduced or extended? And this is a paragraph plan, because paragraphs are a great thing in writing. They're great from the marker's point of view. So when I'm marking IELTS writing, or any writing, I can see probably from 5 meters away if it's a good piece of writing by looking at the shape of what they've written. If someone holds it up and I can see paragraphs in the right kind of sizes, so smaller introduction and so on, I know that that it's likely that it's a good piece of writing, that the student at least has tried to organize their ideas. And so I make that clear to the students. And this paragraph plan gives them paragraph focus for each one. And even though they don't have to do separate paragraphs in task 1, I think it still helps, and it's no reason you're not punished for it or anything. It's a good thing. And then I make a model. Now the model would come from the plan. So this is exactly following the plan we had here. And also I would use a vocab and grammar so we can see reduced in size, removed. That's the vocab that I taught earlier. One thing I think people sometimes get wrong is they write models maybe that's not achievable for that level of student, and I don't think that's particularly helpful. So I want the students to feel that the models that we use are something that they could aspire to with the language they've got, and that makes it, just writing a perfect model 9 doesn't help them. So this is all language that we've done, for example. The best thing you can do, I think, is to write these in real time with the class. So what I would do is project the map, the plan, sorry, and the map, or they'll give them copies of that, and then project up my keyboard and write this in collaboration with taking suggestions from the students and writing it up and showing the process in that way. Now, it does take a bit of confidence to do that in your writing. So it might take a bit of practice, but I think it's the most powerful thing you can do. By the end of it, the class will feel that's their model, and they will all ask you to send. They'll say, can you send me that? Can you send me that? They will be desperate, and they will understand it from a deep point of view. So that's something I do a lot, and I think it's great to do. Okay, I mentioned ideas. I don't know if you've had this problem. You know, I taught writing for years and years with classes, and I'm very thorough, and I would teach them plans and models and so on, and give them a task, and very often say, right, now practice. And they go, students would say, sir, you know, my Emirati students, and I'd say, yes, and they say, what do we write? You know, write an opinion essay about this topic. And they say, but what should I write? And okay. And I used to think that, and I know teachers can think, you know, okay, that's a problem. It's not my problem. Why don't you know? Why don't you have ideas? You know. But then my way of thinking is, if they've got the problem as a teacher, then that is my problem, and I need to help with that, because where they are now is how they got there is not really my concern. Maybe their school didn't encourage them to have their own ideas or to share them. But so how can we get around that? And this is somewhere where I feel quite good about what I achieved with this, because I think I've come, if you only take one thing from this session, I would maybe take this, because what I went back at the model answers that I've written, and I've written hundreds, and I looked for patterns. I thought, how do I get ideas? What kind of ideas do I put in? Because I never find a problem with ideas. I seem to write them easily. And I discovered something interesting. I discovered that I always use the same ideas, really, whatever the topic. So if you look here, I've made something called an idea eye, and it's just a visual kind of way of remembering this. I discovered that whenever I tend to write, whatever the topic, I tend to find ideas around these sort of subtopics: health, environment, money, economy, and education, society, and makes life easy and hard. I put them in the out ring to make them a bit, they're probably less common. The most common ones are the middle 3. And I put it in a visual. So how does this work? Well, first I'd ask the students to memorize this. So I drill them on it until they know the 6 things. So they've got that in their head, and they go into the exam when they're doing a test. And then if you give them a topic, for example, using a train or using cars, I get them to start by thinking about these subtopics. And very often they'll find something on either side, good or bad, positive or negative, for and against. They'll find something on each of these. So for example, if it's health, trains and cars, Okay, it's safer by train. That's a health sort of issue. On the environment, well, trains use less fuel. Trains are better for the environment, basically. We should all be in trains, we shouldn't be in cars, and 3 empty seats. Money and economy. Okay, so trains and cars. Well, trains are cheaper. You don't have to buy a car. The economy point of view, well, you have to. There's a big investment for the country, obviously, in trains. So I've got a couple of ideas from that. It's society. Okay, well, trains connect villages to cities, don't they? Trains are means of people getting around and not being cut off. So there's an idea for society. Makes life easy or hard? Well, cars are convenient. You go door to door. Education. Okay, well, you have to learn to drive. So for this one, this is a upper intermediate lesson from Voices. There's a task here, a writing task within a really good lesson, saying the second one, vegetarianism is a healthier diet. So what I would do there is I would maybe ask them to think about eating meat against being a vegetarian. So can you think for just a minute what kind of ideas you might have from the ideas eye on eating meat against being a vegetarian? Let's put them in the chat, if you could. Anything, for example, what could you do for health on that? Or if you just put anything in chat, would be great. The health meat could be more detrimental. Exactly, yeah. Thank you, Amir. Okay. I'm not getting a huge number of ideas, but what about, for the environment, which is better for the environment? Meat or vegetarianism? Yeah, vegetables are much more sustainable. We get more out of the land and so on. So I think we can use this on pretty much any topic. And oh, sorry, that's not moving. Okay, so I'm just coming to the end of writing. I did say that it would take most of the time of the session. So for 3 student strategies, I would give them, I like to give the students. One is learn your word count for an average line. Students waste a lot of time in the exam counting. They will count 18 times because they're aware of how important it is to meet the target. But it's much better if they can learn, if they practice, count their words. They will always write the same number of words per line if you give them the right size paper, exact IELTS style paper or VSTEP style paper. If they can learn that, they can save time by doing a simple calculation, how many lines they need to write before they start counting to get it right. The second one, start with task 2. I always get my students to start with task 2. What tends to happen if they don't, they start with task 1 and they'll go on for 30 minutes because they want to get it right, but they then don't have enough time for task 2, and task 2 is much higher rate, it has a higher weighting. So I encourage them to start with task 2. Then they can spend 40 minutes and they've still got time to get the marks from task 1. That's a better way of getting a higher score. The third thing I do is I get them to write an introduction very quickly. So when they go into the exam, I say, you want an introduction for task 2 in 5 minutes. Then stop and think of your ideas, rather than sitting there for 15 minutes worrying and not having anything on the paper. So I teach them how to write an introduction, so something like this. Many people prefer traveling by car rather than traveling by train. In my opinion, trains are better. In this essay, I look at both sides. So I teach them how to write a simple 3-line introduction, 3-sentence introduction, and I say, go in, you don't need to think too much here, you just need, which is your opinion. Now, after 5 minutes, they've got 30 odd words on the page and they feel good about themselves. They have started. And now they've also probably been starting to think about the idea some ideas they could have. And now they can stop and make a plan. So that gets them going faster. So those are my 3 tips for student exams. Right, I'm going to move on to speaking now. So speaking, again, the same process. From a teaching point of view, we practice individual exam sections in the same way as you do with writing, individual tasks, and use the criteria in the same way as with writing. And pronunciation, Voices has a very good approach to this. because pronunciation in voices is quite radical. It hasn't really been done in a course book like this before. We have a writer, an academic expert called Marek, and his basic approach, or the approach of the whole series, is about being understood, intelligibility, not trying to sound like a native speaker. So, for example, I'm sure your Korean students, they're never going to master. They're not likely, if they're adults, to ever sound sort of English, but that's not the aim. The aim is to be, of these courses, is to teach them to be understood by anybody across the world. And that's also what is being measured in IELTS. In IELTS, there's no accent criticism. It's about communication. So I would connect voices lessons to the exams, and we have speaking lessons, obviously, in this course, but there's also a thing called communication lessons, which Chia, who you saw in the, giving the introduction, that's her area of expertise, and she's put that throughout the course. All the levels, and 7 levels of this course, have a lesson D, which is communication, which is again a radical and new idea, looking at other aspects of communication, not just the words we say, but many other aspects of communication, like listening to other people, the way that we interact with people, and the way we respond, the way we try to persuade. And there's many other areas of communication which we're going to connect to the exam, and they will make us better communicators. So connecting it to the exam, another way is also, here we have a VSTEP activity. The second is called solution discussion, and a typical one is there. You and your friends want to improve your health and fitness. Here's 3 suggestions. Which one is the best choice? So the best choice activity. So when I'm teaching from voices, I'll be looking for opportunities to do an exam practice from the standard lesson. So here we've got a communications thing, exercise your empathy, which is not something you usually teach in a course book, but of course it is part of good communication. And here they have to work in pairs, read 4 situations and decide on the best way of dealing with the situations. And this is one situation. You're just about to sit down on a crowded bus when another passenger pushes in front of you and sits down herself. It's very clear that you were going to sit there. She doesn't say anything. So what do you do? So this is an example of practicing this in this interesting context would be good practice for that VSTEP activity. What would you do? Think about that for a second. If I'm sure that's happened to most of us if we take buses. Okay. Did anything in the chat there? That's fine. I'm going to move on because of time, but thank you for those of you putting in suggestions. Vocabulary for speaking. This is a big one, I think, because this is one of the places where probably vocabulary is tested the most in a way. Okay, writing is kind of predictable. You can use words knowing that they're going to be useful. Vocabulary could be on any topic. But students need to provide a measurable sample. That's a key for me. I've got a sample bottle there. If you go to give blood and you only give a drop, then they can't test it. The doctor won't be able to tell you what's wrong with you. You need to give enough for them to measure. And I think of the exam as the same thing. The students are giving a sample of their English, of their vocabulary or their grammar. And it has to be sufficient for the teacher to see that they're at that level. And to do that, I think you should encourage risk-taking. To try out words, because again, IELTS rewards that. And when they do use a word that is new or higher level, give praise. Remember, notice it. Yeah. This is an example of an activity I do that I came up with to try to encourage students to go up a level with their vocabulary. So these are my kids. A few years ago now they're 22 and 19, and I don't know, 9 and 6 or something like that. So Jay and Esme. And now Esme, I was walking back from school one day, sometime around now, or maybe a bit later. And she said, Daddy, we put words in jail today. And I said, what? My ears pricked up. I thought, that sounds interesting. Because I've learned most of what I know about education from watching my kids' education, actually. And I said, what is that? And she said, well, we're not allowed to use the word nice when we write. We're not allowed to use this word. They're in jail. So I thought that was a great idea. So I started to make these, which is what I call the word jail. And if you see at the bottom, there's a speaking task. It's a typical IELTS speaking task, talk about a house. And I thought, what are the words that students are going to keep using at a low level? House, big, place, new and old. And I thought, what would I rather they were using? Like roomy or location instead of place. So I made these activities where they would put these, they would put those words. So under house, they might have detached house, more specific. Under new or old, have modern. And then they do the speaking task based on that, but not being allowed to use big and house. So there's a game element to this. And these are quite easy to make, but you don't need to make them because what you can do is just adapt the book. So for example, upper intermediate in voices is they do adjectives of emotions. And these are the adjectives that are done here. One of them I used in the introduction. Did anyone notice which word? I used one of those when I said how I felt about doing this session. Anyone wants to put that in the chat if you noticed it? It was very early. The very first thing I said was one of these words. Okay, no, it was thrilled. Yes, thank you, Fernando. Yeah, it was thrilled. I said thrilled. Now, if you noticed that, you'd be a great IELTS marker, a great IELTS speaking person, because what we IELTS people do, they're sitting there listening, their ears are pricked up, hearing things that are above level. Every time they hear them, they go, oh, and start to think about putting the student into a higher category of marking. So if they hear 3 or 4 words like that, they're able to move them up, and they know that if IELTS go back or VSTEP go back and listen and say, why did you give them that? They can say, why did you give them a 6, not a 5? They can say, well, look, they said petrified and thrilled and motivated, and it's justified. So what are the words that students would use if they weren't using these? Well, I think they would be using things like surprised rather than astonished. You know, I was surprised yesterday when I won the competition. I was worried about my sister because she didn't pass her exam. I was very angry when my team lost the game. I was angry. You know, my mother always gets angry when I'm late. I'm happy, you know, I'm happy in my class. The teacher's very nice. I'm happy, you know, I'm a happy person. I always think good things will happen. I'm scared when in the dark, walking home, you know, when it's dark. I'm happy when I pass my exams. Or I'm very happy. I could have started saying, I'm very happy to give this course, you know, to give this session. So these, I think, are the words that students would be likely to use. So I'm going to put them in jail. So I'm using the book, the lesson from Voices, and just extending it slightly. So in exercise 13 in the book, it says, you're going to tell a story about a time when you experienced a strong emotion. And that's designed to practice these activities. So to ensure that they do that, I'm going to put in jail, surprised, happy, angry, scared, and worried. They're not allowed to use that in the activity. And that's going to force them to use these new words and to get the practice they need, so they might use them in the exam. Those words are there for them to use. And I've just changed the activity a little bit because I want them to use more than one of these. So talk about a day when you experienced different strong emotions, say when it happened, and I've made it into an IELTS looking activity. This could be done instantly, just typing it up on the board. It wouldn't take a minute to do that. But now it looks like an IELTS activity, and it gives them practice in IELTS with basically the same thing from the book and using the vocabulary as an extension activity to that lesson. I've also got here an observation and feedback form. I just put that in this morning. I remembered that this is something I think really is helpful for students. So you can look at this if you look at the side later, but I put my students, I will do live practice activities with them and get other students to watch and take notes just to get them to understand the exam. Now, this is something that you might feel uncomfortable. Some students might be uncomfortable giving feedback or so it's up to you how you use this. It could be just pairs, it could just be you. But I think that's quite a nice thing to do. So observation and feedback when they get used to what they should be doing. And this raises exam awareness. There's 3 parts of IELTS, for example. They can see that they get used to that. They're all different. And hopefully they get used to a bit of pressure on themselves, which will reduce stress in the actual exam, because you know that stress does affect their performance when they're faced with someone they're not used to. So if they're used to giving feedback to each other, then that's a good practice, I think, for an exam situation. So just to finish with the speaking part, I've got 3 exam strategies. IELTS part 2, 2 minutes. They've got to get to 2 minutes. If they don't, they're punished. And that's a thing you can affect. So I would say to students, always use a timer, and you're trying to talk through 2 minutes. What you want is to be stopped by the examiner. Sometimes they feel that's bad. The examiner told me to stop. No, that's the best thing. It means that you've gone past your 2 minutes, and the examiner has to stop you or they get in trouble. So they're aiming to go through the gates. I'd advise them not to speak too fast for that reason, not to start off and then start, like, now what? And they can use the prompts as a plan. Remember, there were 3, remember we had these 3 prompts here and one at the bottom. So there's 4 prompts. And that's a plan for their speaking that will help them through the 2 minutes. Secondly, I'd say focus on communication. Use body language and eye contact. Look at the person and use the strategies from the voices. Because it's a communication, it's not just speaking. You will get students who walk in and maybe look away, and they don't then understand, they can't see if they're not being understood, they're not communicating correctly. So get them to practice using body language, to look confident and to try to feel, even if they don't, you can put that on like as if like more in an interview or something like that. And take risks. Like I said before, they need to risk using higher level or they're not going to go beyond their current level. Okay, so reading. Teaching reading, there's 3. IELTS and VSTEP, they test skills and comprehension. That's what they do. And you can't really play the criteria on that. If you can either read well or you can't. You can't make huge jumps just by knowing about the exam. You can make some, but I'll show you them. But the main thing is to build strong reading skills, which is where a course like Voices is going to help, because that's what it does. It teaches reading skills and through high interest intensive reading. We can also teach how to do question types, which I'll come on to. But for example, what I mean by high interest reading, you might recognize. Okay, so here's an IELTS, a Voices lesson, Voices Intermediate Plus, along the Mekong, and this is a very interesting reading. It's engaging. It's got real person, and it's integrated. So it's not just reading; it integrates language. It does everything that a great course book can do, which is a bit more difficult to do if you're writing your own sort of text or cutting these out of a newspaper. And it's got Googleable people. They're real. They're not. Nobody in here is not real in the readings. They're real people. So you can go and Google, and they can do further reading, following up about them. And also, you've got these beautiful National Geographic images, which obviously adds interest, and students will leaf through and be looking at those. Be interested. This is the actual lesson. And so the readings on the right, and the activities, and critical thinking, and everything else on the left. So I think there's no real shortcut to teaching reading other than developing their reading skills through something like that, and getting them to do extensive reading outside the class as much as possible. Question types, we can make a difference. So look at this question type. I think I went through the questions and I found 12, or maybe more. But I found 12 different question types. And each one might require different skills or be benefited with different skills. So I teach the question types and what skills to use. So for example, these are the 12 question types that I found when I went through past papers. So I couldn't find a list from IELTS on this, but these are what I found. And I think you'll find similar ones. Yeah. So sentence completion, different kind of completions, and true, false, not given, yes, no, not given, and then some other ones, multiple choice, we all know, and so on. I teach these discreetly. And some of them are easier than others, because everyone knows what to do with a multiple choice. It's you've got A, B, C, or D, and you choose one of those letters and you write the letter, but not all of them are that easy. So if you look at this, for example, sentence completion, what do they have to write? Questions 1 to 5, complete each sentence with the correct ending A to I below. Write the correct letter A to I in boxes 1 to 5 on your answer sheet. I don't want the student to read that for the first time in the exam, because they might use it by level 4, but band 4 students aren't going to be able to understand that. And they might well start writing numbers rather than the letters. So I would definitely do this before any exam, that they've seen them and seen what to actually do. And a good example of that is this. I'm going to test you guys on this. Okay, so this is a paragraph heading question. This is a genuine, I've used IELTS as a model for this. I'm going to ask you a question, just to write in the chat box. Which one of these is a possible answer for this question? C, 5, V, or 111? What would be a legitimate answer for a student to write on their answer sheet? It's tough, yes. I'll put 4, 3 and 4. Okay, if we put 4, you're right. So the answer is 111. If you put V, it's not right, and there's a reason, because, and this is nasty, I think. I'm sorry. 3, V is an example. Number 2, example, answer V. So that can't be an answer. And students don't need to know that. It's helpful if they know that. They can cross them out before they start. No, don't write those, especially if, for example, they're guessing, they haven't got much time left. If they guess V, then that's not going to be the right answer. And we know that from the beginning because of the question. So this is the worst one I'm showing you here. They're not all as bad as this, but this is definitely, I find this challenging to know what to do. Forget about the fact you've got a difficult reading to go with. So this is worth spending time with. But it won't help with the reading, but it will help with getting maybe a slightly higher grade. This is the lesson from just looking at the lesson. One other thing I would do with reading is to prepare exam-style questions like the previous one and put them with this reading. They're not, you could do a simpler one like true, false, not given. And one thing you can do with that, which I like to do, is get the students to make them. So if put the students in pairs, for example, and take one paragraph each and ask them to write one exam true, false, not given question pair, and then share them. So they've got a bank of questions, and they will get to know, they'll get to think about how these exam questions are written as well from that point of view. And you can make a bank of them. And I would build up a collection of these. So if you're teaching, say, this book, if you're teaching voices with it in a team, you can all take on one of those exercises, one reading, and then build a bank quickly, as long as you're sharing. So please share. I think sharing is what in our profession is the best thing we do. It's what I'm doing right now, I hope. Okay, so the 3 strategies for reading, I would say are practice. I'm sorry, I realize we're coming to 9 o'clock and some of you might have to leave or whatever. This is going to be available to you if you want to see the end of it. So I'll just finish in a few minutes and you'll be able to see the recording. And if you are leaving now, thank you so much for coming. It's great that you're here. So my 3 reading strategies. I practice with an answer sheet. So when you're doing any exam practice or something, don't just get them to write the answers on the page or something. Give them an answer sheet separately. And the first thing I do is ask them to look at the question paper and see how many questions are in each thing. So if the first question is 10 questions or 11, make a little line on the page, because very often when you're marking the reading, now it'd be admin, they'll find that people have displaced everything by one mark, and then they end up with 0 because they've gone all the way through with the wrong numbers, which can happen under exam conditions. And make sure they're copying the words correctly when they're given, because spelling will be not a correct answer. The admin person marking it isn't allowed to say, well, that's okay. It's not fair if they do that, so they have to say wrong or right on the spelling. Timing, I would say spend more time on the earlier questions if you're aiming for 4, 5, 6s. They're not so likely to get marks out of the last ones, although it's worth guessing, especially if you know what kind of letter you should write in the exercise I just asked you to do. Don't leave anything blank, but spend more time on the earlier questions. That will pay off more. You quite often when you're marking, you find people getting 0 on the last thing. You think, how have you missed everyone? But it's because it's designed to lead lower level people who haven't got the skills at that level. It will push them the wrong way. And don't read everything. You haven't got time in an hour to read the whole thing. You've got to apply scanning skills to find where you're looking and the skimming. And also things will go in order. So you could using that to orientate yourself. So if you're in question 5, question 6 is likely to be below that. So using those kind of things in terms of reading. Finally, listening. Okay. So with listening, another receptive skill, I would again teach the question types. And again, I would exploit voices for interesting text and skills development because it's all in there. With listening, they only listen once, and that's key. In IELTS, you only listen once. I think in VSTEP, it's the same. I might be wrong. Okay. But you're not only listening, are you? You're reading and writing. So you have to read the question, you have to listen, and you have to write an answer. So the more you can do of that, the more you can separate those, reading the question before you listen, the better. I do see students quite often they're looking around and then it starts and then they start reading the question, but they're trying to listen. You can't do that. Oh, you can, but it's very hard. It gets more difficult as it goes on, again, like reading, and they should know that. You expect it to be harder as it goes further on. And also, I would encourage classroom remembering that all the time that you're talking in class is, in fact, listening practice, and that's why we do, speak in English when we can. And the students, remind students of that if they're listening effectively in class, they're getting lots of practice on listening. And it's natural and it's very helpful for them. And in voices, we've got pronunciation for listening as well. The idea of some pronunciation is what you need to produce, but you don't always have to sound like a native speaker. You don't have to produce all to be understood. If you say she will as a non-native speaker, or as a, for example, Vietnamese speaker, people will understand you perfectly, but you will need to understand it because if you can't hear it, you won't recognize that it's, for example, putting something into the future. So look out for the pronunciation for listening voices, which is a really good thing, and make sure that those are going to help them with the listening. It's called receptive pronunciation. And again, Marek, our expert, is very, very keen on that, and that's a special thing about this course. So the 3 strategies I would say, 1, read ahead. So get the students, in the exams it will say, now check your answers after they finish, but there's not much point in checking their answers apart from spelling, and they can do that at the end because they can't listen again. So when it says check your answers, I would say read the next question, read ahead. Secondly, I'd say, make sure you know how many words you have to write, because so often students will write 3 words when they're only allowed to write 2. And then the admin person marking it will have to say no, even if the right answer is there. And, one mistake like that can be the difference between 1 band. And these bands are quite low. So for a 5 or 6, I'm not going to give numbers, but it's not many out of 40 they have to get. So it's quite compressed at the bottom end for the lower marks. The 1 mark can make a big difference, and 4 marks can make a huge difference. So don't make silly mistakes. And I would say total focus and listening. I have to get my students to sit like this, not to look around, not to be worried by what shoes the invigilator is wearing or what their friend is doing or where they are. They really need to get in because it's 1 time only and it's gone and you can't get it back. So that's my listening advice. Okay, so actually I have kept to an hour from when we started, but just the final thing I'd like to talk about is just some takeaways from the session. And I know we see the word takeaways from sessions, and it does worry me sometimes because I know that however many people out there have got 165 participants, and that means they've got 165 different takeaways. You've all come from a different point of view. Some of you may take away very little or reject it, not think that anything is new. That's fine. Someone else might think I've really learned about this or I've learned about that. So this is a kind of general what I was aiming at for takeaways. And there may be this may not be everything. But first, I've tried to put into the session lots of practical ideas, or enough so that you can all get 1 or 2 that I know I think you won't have seen before. Sometimes because they've been my own ideas. But I don't like going to sessions myself when I don't come out with something I can use. I find that a bit depressing if I sit through an hour of someone talking and think, well, so what can I do for that? So I have tried to put some in. I would encourage you to think, I think I'm showing you, I'm trying to think like an examiner. If I'm teaching an exam class, I want to get into the examiner's shoes and think, what does the examiner think about this? What's they looking for? And the more you can think like an examiner, the more the students can think like an examiner, the more likely they are to push their level, the level of language they've got up into a higher bracket. Understand the exam criteria, that's what an examiner does, and teach those criteria. Make sure the students be very transparent with them. Don't criticize them, don't attack them, they're there. They can't change that. You can't sit there worrying, why do we have to do this, or why is it such a long exam, why can't I finish? Well, that's there for a specific reason. Let them know it's a 1 hour class, you know, they've only got this amount of time for reading, and what can they best do with that time? I suggest that you use a course book that makes learning English interesting and productive, because you're there for a year. It's not all about exam practice. If you sit there doing exam practice throughout a course, it's deadly dull. And what you want it to be is interesting, but not only that, you want them to learn English and get their level up to the band, the B2, or whatever it is that's being tested. And to do that, you need, for example, I think this Voices book is excellent because it's got everything in terms of pedagogy and integration and language development that you need. But I would connect the lessons in that book to the exam all the way through. If I've got an exam at the end of it, be it VSTEP or IELTS or any other exam, I would keep connecting it so the students can see the relevance of what they're doing, because they might be inclined, and then some teachers might think, oh, we should just do exam practice, and that's not because it won't develop their level. And finally, I'd say be an active, positive problem solver for your students. Everything I've talked about today comes from my classroom, really, because I've learned 90% of what I know about teaching has come from being in the class. Of course, I learned from sessions and I learned from, you know, reading books and training. But mostly I learned from looking and listening to my learners, what they can't do, what they need to do, how they respond to things. And when I sit faced with a problem, like they don't know how to think of ideas or whatever, I think I'm going to help them solve that problem, not that's your fault. And I think that's what kept me interested in teaching for 30 years. You know, I've never lost interest in teaching because the students always bring me more problems to solve. And that I love that process. And with that, I'd like to thank you, every one of you, 160 people who have turned up to this. It's been great to have you. I mean, this is fantastic and it's amazing. I feel amazing. I'm 10,000 kilometers away from you now. You know, if you're in Vietnam, 10,000 kilometers, 7 hours away, I'm about to start my day. And I'm going to go to work thinking, I've had a great time sharing, and I'm hoping you're going to finish your day thinking, I've learned something today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us today. I'm just going to share my screen just for a couple of minutes. And a few things that I would like to say. So firstly, I just want to say, Gary, that you know, from looking at the chat box there, you know, people really did get a lot of takeaways, a lot of practical ideas. In particular, people really liked the simplified descriptors you showed at the beginning for IELTS. People felt that would be extremely useful, and a lot of people are requesting if we could send them a copy of that. So I don't know, I'll talk to you about that later on maybe. People also, they really like the idea for generating ideas for writing, and the word jail, you know, encouraging people to use the higher level vocabulary for speaking tasks. People really enjoyed that as well. So and lots of other things. So yeah, loads of great ideas there. So I just want to wrap up by reminding everyone who's here, well, firstly thanking everyone for coming, and reminding you that the content and materials that Gary's been using to frame his examples with from National Geographic Learning's new program called Voices. One of its strengths, as we saw today, is that it can be used to help students prepare for high stakes exams such as IELTS or VSTEP. If you're also interested in pronunciation or mediation, communication, personalization, learning about National Geographic explorers, this is a title that is worth checking out. And if you, I'm going to put a poll up on the screen. If you would like to find out more about this program Voices, if you just click yes here, and we will get in touch with you and give you some more information. So if you'd like to talk to one of our learning consultants about this program, please put yes now. If you don't, that's fine. You can press no. Okay, up to you. So I'll just leave that poll running. We are going to send you a follow-up email tomorrow. And the follow-up email will have links to the recording, and it will also have a link to a certificate, which you can download and put your name on. We're going to send that to Gary as well. Yeah, so look out for that email, which we will send you by the end of the day tomorrow. We do have another upcoming webinar in this series, in our current series, the Voices series, which is on June the 9th. And this session is actually with the publisher of Voices, Rachel Gibbon. So she was in charge of making the materials that Gary showed you today. And in this session, Rachel is going to be looking at what students need to be successful communicators in English and how best to teach them. So she's going to be discussing things like growth mindset thinking, how to interact with people from a wide range of cultures and backgrounds. So I think Chi, yes, has just put the registration link in there. So please click on that link now and go and sign up for another really exciting webinar coming to you on June the 9th. Again, this is exclusively for teachers in Vietnam. Another couple of things before we wrap up. If you're not already following us on Facebook, please go to our Facebook page, follow us, become a fan. That way you can find out about all of our events, everything we've got coming up. And yeah, I should say as well, we also, the microsite. Chi, can you put the link to the microsite in? And I'm going to go to a new share. And we'll have a quick look at that. Yeah, so we've got here, we've actually got our own website for Voices, and we've got some very exciting live events coming up. Let's see if I can just find the right page here. Struggling a little bit. Here we are, that's not the right page. I'm sorry, I'm struggling. I've got so many windows open. Let's go. Okay, one more second, please. In here. Where's my chat box? Yes, here it is. Right, there we go. I think I've opened it now. Yeah, so this is our microsite where you can find out more information. And we also have down here, here you can also find out about the webinars. Here's Gary's webinar. And we also have very exciting, we've got some live events, hopefully coming to a city near you. At the moment, we have these 3 live events already confirmed. You can register for them here. And I think in total, there are going to be 7 or 8 of these starting in June, okay, and running through July. So please keep an eye on our microsite here, and hopefully you'll be able to join us live for a really exciting event. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our session. So I'm just going to thank Gary once again. There were I don't know if you've got time for one question there, Gary. There is a question about reading skills, a question about making interesting lead-ins that motivates learners into reading. I don't know if you've got any opinions on that on there.
I can't see the question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it says, in my opinion, teaching reading skills is tough, especially how to make an interesting lead-in that motivates learners to engage in the reading. I wonder if you've got any final comments on that.
Well, I agree. Excuse me. Teaching reading skills is tough. Need to start from interesting reading. I mean, that's the basic thing. I think I've done this. Worthy reading or things I think students should read isn't going to motivate them. As a teacher trainer, I think when you're looking for a lead-in, you're looking to that students want to go to the reading. So if you do a pre-reading activity and then you say now read, and they don't go oh and they grab the thing, you failed with the pre-reading. And that's something I used to teach in CELTA courses and stuff, because students would trainees would say, yeah, I did a pre-reading. You said, yeah, but did it motivate the people to read the reading? So what you want is something that is not challenges, some curiosity about what they're going to read. Curiosity often comes from your own opinions, I think, as well. So you need to personalize. You want to get people thinking about their experience and seeing if it's shared with what's in the reading. But it's a very good question. And yeah, I think you need to experiment with your own students to see what it is that if you're holding the reading back and they get it, that makes them want to read it. And yeah, if you can find the answer to that for everyone, please share it.
Thank you, Gary. That's a great answer. I agree 100%. It's about connecting them to the reading, right? Give them a reason to read it. Get them hooked on it.
I have to say, just on the thing, a lot of people I know, and I've done it, we watch videos beforehand, and I think you've got to be careful if you're watching YouTube videos that preempt the reading too much, because then you lose the reading practice or skill, because if they already know that what's in it, you've got to, it's a fine line. I'm not saying don't use videos. I think they're great. But as teasers, like a trailer in a film, a movie. Think of movie trailers. How they hook you and make you want to watch it. They give you enough, but not too much.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for the advice. And yeah, so just finally, because I know we're over time, and a lot of people have stayed to listen. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, massive thanks to Gary. And we'll let you get on with your day. And yeah, I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and we hope to see you again at one of our events fairly soon. Okay, so take care, everyone. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Look out for that email by the end of tomorrow, okay, with the certificate and the recording. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.